Hi, welcome back to the channel. Firstly, apologies for the hair. I was planning on getting it cut before lockdown happened, and that didn't happen, and now I look like a reject from a 90s boy band again. So anyway, on with the program. Last weekend was a pretty crazy weekend that kind of had something for everyone as far as racing goes. I'm going to primarily be looking at single-seater series that were racing, but I will look at the three notable endurance events that were going on as well. So as there's a lot to do, let's get on with it. Formula 1. Before the teams arrived in Turkey, the talk was all about getting to see modern cars hammering through the infamous Turn 8. You know, would the current spec need to lift, or would they be able to take it flat? And unfortunately, reality dawned Friday morning when the drivers found out that not only would they not be taking it flat, getting around the track at all seemed to be a bit of a challenge. In the years since F1 had visited the circuit last, the track had been used for many things, none of which appeared to be racing. And the organisers had hastily had to retarmac the circuit. But in the short time frame between Turkey being confirmed and the race going ahead, the new tarmac was very new and hadn't had a chance to grip up. So the fastest F1 cars ever were struggling around 10 seconds slower than they'd previously visited in 2011. In fact, it was so bad that Guido van der Garde and Karun Chandhok were joking about how high up the grid their old GP2 qualifying times would have put them. So, to put it in perspective, racetracks that most of the grid hadn't raced on, zero grip, how could it possibly get any harder for the drivers? Well, it's been a bit of an in-joke this year about how we get predicted rain practically every race and never receive it. But that's what the drivers faced when they came out for qualifying. And if you'd put the driver names in a hat and pulled them out, your grid probably wouldn't have looked too differently. But it was the size of the gaps that caught people out. Charles Leclerc went out in Q2 with over a 6-second gap to first. There was also controversy as several drivers in Q1 seemed to set their quickest times under a yellow flag, although only the McLaren and Lando Norris seemed to get penalised, with Carlos getting a penalty for impeding Sergio Perez as well, heaping further misery on an already bad day for them. One stat I heard was that it was the first time since 1968 that there were no Ferraris, McLarens or Williams in the top 10. And the winner that day was apparently a Mexican, and Checo Perez gave himself a great shot at repeating that by qualifying third. Frustratingly for him though, it was Lance Stroll who got the pole. But Sergio was not as frustrated as Max Verstappen, who had been fastest in every session up to that point. Starting second, would his luck change in the race? Before the race, there was the national anthem where the two guys who mathematically could win the title were separated from the others and stood by the trophy by a statement saying 7 points to the stars. Now, am I the only one who thinks that it would have made a bit more sense to have Lewis stand there when he won the title? I mean, really, what was the point of pulling Valtteri aside to be involved in something that kind of clearly had nothing to do with him at that point? But maybe that's just me. Having had a tricky Saturday, as the drivers got ready to think about the race, it rained. Before the drivers even got to the grid, Giovinazzi had put it in the wall and got the car stuck in a gravel trap, and Russell had slid into the pit entry wall while trying to go for another cycle lap. At the start, the cars on the pole side seemed to get away slightly better, but that might have something to do with a very slow getaway from Max in second. The result seemed to be that a lot of cars ended up in the same piece of tarmac for turn 1. And an incident was kind of inevitable at that point. Bottas and Ocon both went round, and any chance Valtteri had of taking it to the next round was over. To add insult to injury, later on in the lap, Bottas outbraked himself trying to take Charles Leclerc, and on the wet side of the track slid into Ocon, putting the pair of them into their second spin in a lap. Racing Point raced off into a 1-2, but behind it was all going on. Lewis had got himself up to third, but slid wide, allowing Sebastian Vettel through, who had gained massively in the first corner chaos, coming through from 11th. The Red Bulls also slid through, but could do nothing about Seb in front, who was having by far his best race of the season. Back in 14th, Seb's teammate Charles Leclerc had lost time avoiding others in the first corner and hadn't been able to gain places in the tricky conditions. With nothing really to lose and already about 40 seconds down on the leader, Ferrari pitted him for Inters on lap 7 and the car kind of came alive. Coming out in 14th place, he tore into the gap ahead of him. The clear pace he had darted the The clear pace he had started the pit stops with Seb in on lap 9 and Stroll in from the lead on lap 10. Max managed to get out just in front of Seb and closed down on Perez ahead. Everyone else pitting meant that Albon actually got to have a lap in the lead and looked like he could be in for a decent result. He pitted soon after though, joining the battle that was forming between Sebastian and Lewis. There was a brief pause in the proceedings as a virtual safety car came out after Giovinazzi had a pullover with mechanical issues. When the racing got up to speed again, the Seb-Lewis-Alex battle recommenced. Lewis on the still slippery track ran wide and was got by Alex into the final complex, and off screen he also got Seb. The tough Vettel defence finally broken. Ahead of them, Max was all over the back of Perez, in fact too close as he got slightly blinded by spray as he had to move to avoid the back of Perez's car, and he lost sight at the edge of the track and hit the curb and spun, forcing him to pit again. Charles, after a terrible first stint where he could do nothing on the wet tyres, had fought his way up to 9th, and I'm sure would in no way have been encouraged to go quicker, finding Max Verstappen a few seconds up the road from him after Max's pit stop. Other drivers had fared poorly in the early stages, with Valtteri Bottas in 15th and Lando Norris, whose car was also waking up on the Inters. Into the last corner, he had a side-by-side contact with George Russell that Russell was less than impressed by, but when Lando hit clean air, he was away. Unfortunately, the gap already between 9th and 10th was about 40 seconds at this point. In terms of strategy, it was generally considered that on the racing line it was dry enough for slicks, but because of the bruising experience the drivers and teams had trying to find grip on the dry track on Friday, nobody wanted to risk it. When Charles came into pit again, it was the Inters that he put on. Because of the gap to Lando, he came out in clear air and set about putting in some seriously searing quick lap times while Ricciardo, Sainz and Verstappen were losing time battling with each other. Carlos got Daniel for 6th after he'd slid wide, lacking grip, and the Renault driver pitted immediately after. He wasn't the only one struggling, as the corner of spin, turn 4, claimed another victim in Alex Albon, who was soon in the pits coming out between a Seb, who had pitted the previous lap but suffered a slight delay and a charging Leclerc, who was in full recovery mode after the poor start. At the front, the gap, which had been as high as 6 seconds not too long previously, was down to 0.8 as Stroll was struggling with graining on his tyres. He pitted from the lead on lap 37. Checo didn't get to enjoy his lead for very long though, as Lewis came round him a lap later. On the drying track with DRS in play, there was little the Racing Point driver could do to stop him. A pit stop issue during this time lost Magnussen 2 laps, and Latifi joined the Turn 4 club, losing it there soon after in what was probably his worst race of the year. Just seriously, he will want to forget this. Lance came out on Inters, but it was soon clear that they weren't working as he was hemorrhaging lap time. First he was taken by Seb, and then when he tried to fight back against Seb, he was lost out to Charles as well. A couple of laps later, Charles took Seb as well, and for all the people who say that Lewis only has the success he has because he has the best car, while he was leading the race, his teammate in 13th place managed to spin again going through turns 1 and 2, and was lapped by Lewis a couple of laps later. Max Verstappen was having a race that swung wildly between looking like he had the pace to win to exploring all the runoff backwards. Charles took him for position on lap 44, and Max too was soon heading towards the pits for new rubber. Stroll, going backwards, lost out to Albon, and then the battle commenced between Albon and Sainz, with first Albon passing the Spaniard before then getting passed back. Not happy with causing cars to spin one at a time, Turn 4 then lulled Kimi into a spin, forcing Albon to brake sharply, resulting in Max behind spinning, trying to avoid Albon. Albon was struggling to get his final set of tyres working, and Max soon took him after he'd recovered. Out front though, Lewis had turned his Inters into slicks and was still going quickly. Behind though, the two quickest cars in the closing stages were the McLarens. Chasing Stroll down for 8th, Lando posted 3 fastest laps in a row and eventually took the position from him. Valtteri, losing positions and the will to live, was told there were 4 laps left, and replied that he wished it was less. Some days are not going to be your day. This definitely was one you'll want to forget. Lewis crossed the line to take the win and his 7th title. Behind him, though, the fight for the podium was fully engaged. Coming to the final straight, Charles got past Checo, but the Racing Point man wasn't letting him go, and Charles outbraked himself defending, which allowed Sebastian through to take 3rd place. Charles was less than pleased with himself afterwards, but hopefully when he thinks about the race he had overall, he should be happy. Perez, 2nd place, was very much deserved after he had driven a very measured race. One of the few drivers who'd made no real mistakes in the whole race. Seemed kind of fitting somehow that the relationship he had with Lewis, that Sebastian got his first podium of the year, the race that Lewis won the championship, and could be there in Parc Fermé and the podium with him, which caused some great pictures and soundbites. Although there was a moment of amusement briefly when they got the Mexican and German flags the wrong way around. Further down the grid, both Red Bull drivers could only reflect on what could have been. Max had suggested that the instability that had been causing him to spin was caused by a 7-degree wing angle difference from one side to the other wing, which, certainly won't help in terms of balance. Mostly, though, he was looking like a frustrated, angry driver who needed to be a bit more patient in the conditions. Especially if he was feeling like his car wasn't right. Albon will be wondering what he could have done if he had managed to make the second set of inters work, but there were positives he could take from the weekend. The McLarens, they kind of had polar opposite races, with Ninja Sainz getting fifth through stealth, while Lando fought hard and was showing massive pace for a gritty eighth after a terrible opening few laps. Following in home ninth after a race that saw his day go from joy to despair was Lance Stroll, having led the opening 38 laps. Racing Point after the race said that there was damage to the underside of Lance's front wing that had caused the graining on his tyres due to a lack of downforce, and basically stole his pace. But there were definitely positives for him to take when he has a chance to analyse his race. After the last few results, a pole and leading for that long is a fantastic result for him. Behind that, where was everyone? I can't tell you about the Toro Rossos, as we never saw them, and then tell me saw anyone else. They were normally going backwards at turn 4. But plaudits and congratulations have to go to Lewis. As Seb said, it was a race that Lewis didn't have any right to win. He used his patience, racecraft, and made the most of the opportunities when they came. Having the discussion on Twitter with Mike from F1 Fanatics, we kind of agreed it seemed an unlikely coincidence that the drivers currently regarded as the best at getting the most out of their tyres came first and second. With Lewis confirmed as champion, Bottas 27 points ahead of Max, and Max 70 points clear of fourth, it's the battle of fourth where their excitement really lives. Daniel Ricciardo dropped from fourth to sixth, leapfrogged by both Sergio Perez and Charles Leclerc, with only 4 points covering the three of them. There's also a tight battle of pride between the two McLaren drivers, with only a point between them. As it's getting towards the end of the year, a lot of series are winding down, and Formula Renault is no exception, with their final weekend being at Paul Ricard. And you're probably getting an idea of the excitement levels involved there. Yeah. In the championship, it had been close up to a couple of rounds ago, but Kai Collette, through no fault of his own, had suffered 2 DNFs in 2 weekends, which had handed Victor Martins a 44-point lead with only 50 points available. For race 1, Collette was starting third, Martins was second, and Lorenzo Colombo, finding a rich vein of form at season's end, took his second pole in as many races. At the start, there was no change to the front three, but further back, David Vidalas had another scruffy start, getting put wide by a slow-starting Hadrian David. Colombo had gapped those behind, but Collette and Martins were trading fastest laps. After several laps of this, their pace kind of slowed as Martins was spending more time looking in his mirrors than looking forward, but still Collette couldn't find a gap. With 8 minutes left, though, he forced one. Martins, unable to take his normal line, ended up running wide at the final turn, but was still able to carry enough speed down the main straight that it took a brave run from Collette into turn 1 to keep the position. A couple of laps later, and Colapinto also managed to get Martins. For Collette to carry his title challenge through to the next round, though, at the final race, he needed a win, with Martins finishing 7th or lower. And as the race headed towards its conclusion, it became clearer that neither of these things were going to happen. Colombo took the flag from Collette, with Colapinto taking the last step on the podium, and Martins doing all he needed to do to take the title in 4th. Quinn was 5th, giving him the rookie title and 4th overall in the championship from the fading David Vidalas, and on to race 2 on the Sunday. Race 2 had a similar look to it, with Lorenzo having his 3rd pole in a row ahead of the champion Martins, and Collette in 3rd, who at this point was just racing for pride. And the start didn't go well for Collette as Quinn got the jump on him, and then it got worse as Collette, trying to fight back, ran wide and Colapinto got the better of him. A few cars spinning early on were glad of the extra runoff at Paul Ricard, but being Paul Ricard, the action was perhaps a bit sparse. Colombo at the front was pushing hard to build a gap to Martins, but Victor was giving him nothing. The gaps that were being made were tenths of seconds, with no one managing to force an overtake. And at the line, Colombo took his 3rd win in a row. The champion Martins in 2nd, Colapinto 3rd, and a slightly deflated Collette 4th. After running so close last year, it was a well-deserved championship for Martins. The worry perhaps is one of backing. I mean, it's never a good sign that neither the championship leaders in either Formula Renault or Formula Regional European Championship got drives in the recent FIA F3 test. Now, with any luck, the championship victory, especially of a team that has its own route through to F1 like ART, may provide some opportunities. For other single-seater action, you had to head east. The Superformula grid at Autopolis saw several replacements on the grid from the previous rounds as Red Bull recalled both their drivers, set a camera on simulated duties in Milton Keynes, and Yuri getting to hang out in Turkey with the team as their reserve driver. Kaz Nakajima and Kamui Kobayashi were also both missing as they were busy saying goodbye to the Toyota LMP1 hybrid at the season closing 8 Hours of Bahrain in WEC. On track, Pole had gone to Tomoki Nojiri with Narei Fukuzumi in second and Naoki Yamamoto third. Toshiki Oyu stalled off the grid on the parade lap, causing him to receive a drive-through later in the race. At the start, the leading cars got away well, and thankfully there were no collisions further back with Ukyo Sasahara stalling. Nojiri led away and managed to get some space to Fukuzumi in second. Nick Cassidy managed to get himself up to 7th, having not been able to set a lap in the final qualifying. 6 laps in, and Sasha Fenestre's terrible run of bad luck continued as the wheel literally fell off his car, and he had to pull over for his third straight DNF in a row through no fault of his own in as many races. The resulting safety car closed the cars up again. Not long after the pit lane opened, Sho Suboi stopped early from third, but was to suffer his own issues when another wheel had an issue on the left rear of his car, and he slowly had to crawl off the track. Nijiri and most of the pack came in as the safety car came out so they could recover Suboi's car. At the restart, there were 3 cars which had taken the gamble not to stop: Yamamoto, Cassidy and Sasahara rolling the dice, hoping they could build a gap to gain position late in the race. Ryo Hirakawa, the championship leader, was having a really tough weekend. An accident in qualifying had left him starting at the back, and having pitted from 10th, he somehow found himself 17 again after the safety car and had to start all over again. The front 3 worked on building a gap, but had to be careful to kind of pace themselves a little bit, not to burn the tyres out themselves. And they left it right until the end, with Sasahara pitting first on lap 37 and Cassidy on 38, which dropped them down to 11th and 8th respectively. Yamamoto took it as far as he could, pitting on lap 40 of 41, and actually making the strategy kind of work for him, coming out in second. And while he lost some time on the cold tyres, he'd gained 3 seconds on the last lap, crossing the line only 0.664 seconds behind Nijiri. In the championship, despite the no score, Ryo Hirakawa still had a decent lead over Nick Cassidy in second, and the win taking Nijiri up to third. With drop scores also being a feature, there's opportunity for some drivers to have a strong run at the end of the season to progress massively, so it's be exciting to see how it plays out. Lots to look forward to in that championship. In the world of sports cars, there were some huge races going on to end the WEC, IMSA and GT World Challenge European Championships. The 8 Hours of Bahrain, 12 Hours of Sebring and 1,000 kilometres of Paul Ricard. The final race of the LMP1 era was a bit of a farce as far as the race went, as the Toyotas were the only LMP1 cars present. Jose Maria Lopez, Kamui Kobayashi and Mike Conway in the 7 had a bit of a fight with their teammates. The number 8 was carrying a success penalty which pretty much handed the championship to the number 7. In a much more competitive class, the LMP2 championship winning 22 United Autosport started on pole. And it was downhill from there for them as they came home 4th, having had a fuel glitch, 5-second penalty, a spin, and managing to misjudge how early the Jackie Chan DC Racing entry were going into the pits, they drove into the back of them. Still, better to have that kind of race after the title is secured than before. The battle for the lead of the class after 8 hours was tight though, the Jackie Chan DC entry driven by Gabriel Aubrey winning from Antonio Felix da Costa and the number 38 Jota by 1.894 seconds, with the Bumblebee Racing Team Netherlands finishing a very respective 3rd. In GT Pro it was a Porsche and pole, and after 8 hours a Porsche 1 and 2 at the line, with the 92 winning from the 91 by 2.8 seconds. The 71 Ferrari 488 held up Ferrari's honour, taking the last place on the podium, and it had been a little bit of a struggle for the Astons in 4th and 5th, with braking issues affecting both the Pro and Am class Astons. Not that the 95 Dane train of Nicky Thiem and Marco Sorensen will care, as 5th gave them enough points with their title rivals not having stellar days either to take the GT Pro Championship. A collision between the Ferrari 51 and M-Class 56 Porsche kind of killed the Ferrari's hopes of a strong result stone dead, as a puncture caused damage to the car and it would eventually trail home 6th in class. GTM class was a little bit of a struggle for the Aston Martins as well, with the 98 AMR and 90 TF Sport Astons gliding, and they'd also have the aforementioned brake issues. As a result of the issues to the number 90, the 83 Ferrari of Manuel Collard, Francois Perrodo and Nicholas Nielsen were able to take the class title. Next year, it is all change, and it'll be interesting to see how the hypercar class works out. We'll have to remember the LMP1 series for the years between 2014 and 2017, where there was proper competition going on, rather than kind of the way it went out of a whimper. But at points during the class's existence, it could very much lay claim to being the most technologically advanced racing cars in the world. As engineering statements go, there are amazing pieces of kit, but as soon as the manufacturers had achieved the results they wanted and moved on, it was kind of game over, unfortunately. But goodbye LMP1, hello hypercar. Could it end up being a case of the king is dead, long live the king? We'll just have to wait and see on that one. With the clash of races, Ferrari AF Corse had needed to make a bit of a difficult decision, as their 51 lineup was competing in both the WEC 8 Hours of Bahrain and the 1,000 kilometres at Paul Ricard. That left them with leaving James Calado in the WEC entry and bringing in Daniel Serra to partner him. And for the GT3 1,000 kilometres of Paul Ricard, they partnered Alessandro Pierguidi with Tom Blomqvist and Karl Ledergaard. Porsche Dynamic Motorsport and Mercedes of ACA ASP were leading the Endurance Championship going into the event, but it was Ferrari with the SMP and AF Corse entries that claimed the front row. Although when they got away, it kind of looked like that might be it for them, as for the first half of the race they started to slide backwards. The GPX Porsche in the lead had got a decent 14-second lap after the first few stints, but solid driving from Ledergaard and Pierguidi took them back to second, closing the gap on the leaders. Within 45 minutes left, the Porsche came into the pits while the Ferrari went longer trying to get the overcut, but they only changed 2 tyres compared to the 4 that was changed on the Porsche. Matteo Jaminet in the Porsche had greater pace but couldn't get past Pierguidi, crossing the line 1.6 seconds behind the AF Corse 51 Ferrari and giving the title to Pierguidi. The overall championship honours went to the Belgian Club Audi WRT team, with the overall driver title going to ACA ASP driver Timur Boguslavski, who at 20 became the youngest driver ever to win it. In IMSA, the 12 Hours of Sebring was on in November for the first time in its 68-year history, with the DPI Mazda of Harry Tinknell, Jonathan Bonmarito and Ryan Hunter-Ray claiming their first victory in the series. Championship victory, though, would go to the number 7 Acura Penske of Ricky Taylor, Helio Castroneves and Alexander Rossi by 1 point from the number 10 Cadillac of Ryan Briscoe and Renger van der Zande. In the GTM LM class, championship victory had gone up the previous round to the number 3 Corvette of Jordan Taylor and Antonio Garcia, although in the last race it saw Porsche take the top 2 spots in their class, which was going to be their final appearance in IMSA for the foreseeable future. Last piece of news of the episode comes from the world of British F4, which had its end of season race in support of the BTCC this weekend. Going into the weekend, Luke Browning and Zach O'Sullivan both had their eyes very much on the prize, with the pair of them level on points. Browning won the opening exchange qualifying on pole ahead of O'Sullivan for races 1 and 3, but after absorbing heavy pressure applied on his rival, he'd take the victory in race 1. O'Sullivan finished on the road ahead in their private battle in race 2, but was to receive a penalty for passing Christian Mansell under yellow flags that put him behind Browning, and more importantly it left him with an increased points deficit going into the final race. O'Sullivan made the best start in race 3, going round the outside of Browning on Paddock Hill Bend, with Browning then slipping to third. With them going 3 wide through clearways, Browning spun on oil and dropped to the back of field, with O'Sullivan also having to take through voiding action going through the gravel before rejoining fourth. Wasting no time and realising this was his chance to reclaim the title, O'Sullivan fought his way back to the lead, taking it on lap 8. However, the racing gods had their own tricks to play, and just before half distance the heavy rain brought out the red flags. Because of the TV schedule, the race was called and half points were awarded, and that meant that Browning took the title by 4 points. Both drivers could and should feel proud of their seasons. Had things been differently, O'Sullivan could have won it. O'Sullivan's efforts did help Carling to the team's title, while his teammate Christian Mansell took the rookie championship. And that's it for me this week. as we come to the end of the action-packed few months, this might be the final Motorsport Rundown episode for a little while, but I might have an end-of-season special for the F1, where I'll probably cover the end-of-season Formula Regional European Championship, F2 and Superformula updates as well. Anyway, catch my breath. But anyway, for now, thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.